Hello, this is Experiments in Poetry and your host, Wendy. Today I will be talking about the story behind the poem Anchor. I chose to release this poem Anchor this week because it is May, which is National Mental Health Awareness Month. I want you to be aware that if you are suffering from high anxiety or depression, this poem can be quite triggering. If you haven't already listened to the poem Anchor, please listen to the poem in its entirety in the video entitled Anchor, a poem about anxiety, depression, and mental health. I have included a link to this video in the description box. I wrote this poem probably at what was the lowest part of my life. So it's quite a difficult topic for me to address because I feel like society in general is obsessed with joy and happiness. The reason why I use the term obsessed is because I think it's to the detriment of all other emotions. It's kind of like the only thing we're allowed to feel is happiness. And if you don't feel that, it's kind of like, ooh, what's wrong with you? And we're kind of expected to just ignore it, push it down, or simply, not show it, or that we're supposed to just kind of let it go and move on, or use whatever tactic that we can to distract ourselves from ever feeling depressed or sad. I'm just want to put the caveat out there to let you know that I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not offering you medical advice. I'm just relaying to you my situation, the things that I have been through, and my thoughts on my experiences. So I feel that this is a difficult topic because while it is true that we need a space in our life for feelings other than joy and happiness, because they teach us something. You can't know what true happiness is if you don't know or understand what it is that makes you unhappy or sad or depressed. And so you want to make sure, or should I say, I want to make sure when I feel this way, that I just kind of reflect on my situation. How did I get here? What could I do differently next time? Was this such a bad situation that, I got to make steps to make changes in my life so that things can be different from here on out? So in essence, I feel like having, other emotions than happiness really help you, or really what drive you to grow and learn throughout your life. On the other hand, I feel like sometimes you can slip into a situation where you are having anxiety and depression to the point where, you won't interact with others. You are self-isolating. You don't want to go out. You don't want to talk to anybody. You just kind of want to lay in bed. Maybe it's affecting your relationships, your ability to work. And some people, when they're trying to cope, they might develop coping mechanisms such as, addictions to drugs, sex, gambling, or self-mutilation practices, or even at its very worst, thinking about self-harm, of suicide, or actually carrying the act out. And so once it gets to this point, it's okay. And actually, I highly encourage that you reach out. And I have included some links on the video and also in the description to the video of places where you can reach out if you feel like that you have reached to these lower depths of anxiety and depression. I feel like just to reach out and talk to somebody and others and hear their stories and how they have coped might make you realize that you're not alone and that other people have gotten this low and deep into their depression before and have worked their way out of it. And, and don't feel sad about it. I mean, you are not alone. Millions of people at this exact moment are going through this feeling of deep depression. So with that said, we'll get into the story behind the poem of Anchor. So this poem is a pretty vivid description of how I was feeling when I was in my darkest moments. I feel like it's pretty straightforward poem. I wrote it in free form, so it's kind of just speaking it right to you. In contrast to the poem that I published last week, which was a poem about, it's called White Noise. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and listen to it. And it might actually be a good complement to this video because the last poem, White Noise, was about, feeling connected with, people and feeling loved and feeling joy and happiness and as one human society. And that poem represents one side of the coin, where we're going to do a complete 180 this week and talk about Anchor, which is what happens when you feel totally disconnected from society. Like you are completely alone. Like you don't want to be connected to anyone. You don't want to be bothered. And as such, the poem is structured completely differently. So last week, it was melodic and rhythmic and structured. A lot of time and effort went to put the place of every word. Whereas in this video, this poem about depression, I used freeform. So I wasn't trying to make anything rhyme or sound particularly good. There's virtually no structure or pattern or rhythm. It is just a person stripped down to their minimum. So with that said, in the first verse, it has been, I have been down for a while, held down deep into the abyss. In this place, no light, no warmth, no love reaches me here. So I'm using the imagery of being in the sea. The water is associated with emotions and the water signs of the zodiac. And I'm talking about being in the abyss, being really down deep. And I'm using that imagery and the pressure and the special exotic sea creatures that live down there. And of course, there's much less life that lives down in the abyss of the oceans than there is, let's say, on a coral reef, which is just teeming with lively, colorful fishes and crustaceans and just animal life of all sort that are very colorful and just thousands and thousands of animals living there. Where when you're down in the depths of the abyss, it's dark. There's no light. There's very few living creatures that can handle that pressure and that depth. And there's not a lot of color, is there? There are some interesting animals that are down there. They're very exotic looking, and they're rare, and it's not as populated. However, one hope you can get at this, which I'm not talking about in the actual poem itself, but just to think, even when you're in your darkest places, there are these luminescent creatures that have figured out a way to find the light. And hopefully you can too. So the next verse is, in this space, only darkness haunts me, holds me down, talks me down. How ugly, how stupid, such an unlovable bitch I was. How disgusting, how vile, what a piece of shit I was. So here I'm just referring to living down in this abyss where it's just so unpopulated that I'm pretty much alone, only with my own dark thoughts to haunt me and to give me anxiety and to kind of feel like an endless cycle of, it's the cycle from hell. You feel down, and then you feel down that you're down, and then you feel even worse, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it exponentially gets worse and worse and worse. And the next verse, the mind drops like an anchor, drags this bag of bones to the bottom, peels off this traitorous shell. How the salt of the sea burns, how the pressure collapses lungs, how the waves like a mortar and pestle pound heart and bone alike. So here I'm using the word anchor for the first time. And I feel like this is true. I mean, as I was saying about the previous verse, how it's just like a mental cycle. You just talk down and then you get even more down and even more down. And how that is very much like an anchor made of iron in the sea. There's no way it's going to float, without an extremely amount of effort of people pulling that back up. If you just let it go, then you're going to keep going down, down, down. And it's the feeling of there's nothing that can stop that from happening. You're just going to fall. It's a sense of uncontrollably falling into these deep negative thoughts like a lead anchor in the sea. And then I talk about how that's going to drag my body down to the bottom of the sea. My body is the anchor, and my body is not longer a human, but it's just a bag of bones. My skin is just keeping this thing that's barely alive just in a little sack, and then peels off this traitorous shell. So again, I'm in the sea, there's a lot of sea creatures, crustaceans that have shells, and it's kind of like the process of this falling as I'm going deeper and deeper into a depression is kind of like, you get stripped away of yourself and your identity and the things you love to do, the things you like to do, your relationships, your bonds with other people. It just gets cracked off of you as you get deeper and deeper into your sadness. And then I talk about how the salt of the sea burns. So once you have no protection or skin or you're damaged, then just the very act of being in your environment stings and burns you. And then how the pressure collapses lungs. So again, when you're meant to be this beautiful, colorful creature living near the surface in society with all the other fish and teeming with life, when you're in your sadness spot and you're down deep, that abyss has a high pressure and you feel like, you can't breathe. And how the waves, like a mortar and pestle, pound heart and bone alike. So here I'm using the imagery of the ocean's actions moving against your unshelled body and how eventually it works like the mortar and pestle to pound you down to nothingness. So in the final verse, the nothingness, as I say, I describe as diminishing to a mere speck of sand. But then I clarify, no, not sand, dirt. Because sand seems, even though a piece of sand is the same probably as a piece of dirt, they're made out of different material. And sand seems somehow, some people when they think of sand, they think of beaches and sunny places and happy things. So I had to correct that and say, no, dirt, because dirt has the connotation of, you're just filthy and you got to get it off of you. And then I say, I am a speck of dirt, the soil of disintegrated body and decomposed mind. So there's some nice imagery for how it feels when someone is deep in depression. You feel like you're nothing. You're lower than nothing. You are just the decomposed leftover something of what was. I hope that you have liked my description of what it feels like to be depressed. And please know that this is an open poetry forum, and I really, really am interested in hearing what my listeners, what they're creating. And so I do accept original poems from my listeners, and there's a possibility that if I select your poem, that I can make a lyric video for it and present it here on this channel. I will never pick a poem that I hate and destroy it on this channel. That's not what this channel is about. I like all forms of poetry. The last poem that I put out was a classically written, structured, formal poem about a happy topic. And then this one was a more modernly written, no structure, free form about a topic that is very sad. So I'm open to everything in between. And also I want to say that I don't care if you previously have published the poem. So if you're already an established writer and you have a book or you want to promote it, then you can, send in a piece of that and I can make a lyric video and we can talk about it. So to submit your work, just email me at wendy@experimentsinpoetry.com. I just want you to know, if you like this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. Hopefully you already subscribed to this channel, but if you're not, please subscribe and hit the bell button if you want to receive notifications when I release new poem videos. If you want to support this channel, you can also donate to a link I placed in the description for the PayPal account for this page. And this will help me get better sound equipment, maybe upgrade to using a video camera instead of just the vocals. And also, if I was ever so fortunate enough that people were writing in, that I can also offer financial incentives to do so. As a final note, it is Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, and my condolences to all the families that have lost loved ones who have sacrificed the most precious thing they have for our country. And I also would like to say, given the topic of this video, is that I hope that maybe those who haven't fallen necessarily physically on the field of battle, but those who have come back but mentally have fallen, and then the war still goes on in their mind, and then these mental images haunt them in forms of PTSD and addiction and depression and anxiety disorders that are all kind of combined and linked together. And so as this war rages on in their mind, they eventually succumb to it too. And I'd like to include those soldiers in our memories as well. Thank you.